Browns 0-8 at home. Just sad.
I haven't heard you this down since Stocky Brown got fired. It's a game that we were in, and it's a game that we just don't finish.
I don't want to watch anymore.
Why? Why does that happen? I'm so sick of watching those plays.
0-16.
I definitely do not want to watch this all 22.
That's up and down to me. That looks like dysfunction. Welcome back, Survivors, episode 53, season 3. This is Surviving the Season live from the Baywater studio in Tampa, Florida. I'm Adam. Greg's here.
Yo!
What's
Exciting
up?
time of year. We're starting. Pete's here, so we get to do our draft talk. So I get super excited about this. This has been the Browns Super Bowl for a long time. Getting ready for that. But I think this is finally the last of that. Starting this next year, we won't be thinking about that the way we have in the past. It's important. We got to get this right, but this is no longer going to be our Super Bowl. We're going to make the playoffs coming up.
Yeah, that's right. All right, we're going to talk some coaches. We're going to talk some draft. As Greg alluded to, Pete Smith is here at _Pete Smith _ on Twitter. You probably already follow him if you listen to this show. He is one of our most valued guests. Pete Smith, what's up, dude?
Not too much. I think I would be stunned if the Browns are picking in the top 15 for the next, basically 10, 15 years. That's where this should be at, short of,
Injury.
Catastrophic injury, like a Tim Duncan situation where your dude goes down and you completely tank out for a year. That should be it. Like this, and honestly, this should be about the earliest pick they have over that course of time. There's really no reason at this point that they shouldn't be in the playoffs for 90% of the time and the next decade plus.
Hell yeah. I agree.
So much fun.
They're in the club.
So this is not what we were going to talk about, but the fact that you brought that up, it will take a major injury, something to Baker Mayfield, and me and Adam were looking at this through the week. What are we going to do at the backup quarterback, Pete? Have you looked into that at all? Do you have any want to keep Tyrod around, or do you have anybody else in mind that they might bring in here?
Well, Tyrod's going to go. If nothing else, Tyrod wants to go, and he's wanted to go since it was clear he wasn't going to be the starter. And he's a great human being and all that, so he wasn't like a whiny bitch about it. But he wants to play, and that's fine. I got nothing against that. So the teams that sort of stand out. He's been linked to Baltimore recently. I think Tennessee makes some sense because I don't think Mariota's that good and he gets hurt a lot. So there's an opportunity there. So I think he'll probably sign on another 1, maybe 2-year deal somewhere. Personally, I think to echo Tom Moore with Peyton Manning.
I was going to say this too.
Yeah, if Peyton Manning goes down, we're fucked. We don't practice fucked. I see a lot of people are like, well, you got to get a better backup quarterback. I mean, honestly, I'd rather save the roster spot and just say it's Baker Mayfield and Drew Stanton. So what I expect to happen, and I'm fully prepared to be wrong, is they'll essentially do what they did with Kevin Hogan in Kansas City, which is they'll use a day 3 pick. In that case, it was a 5th rounder, take somebody, maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, basically try to sneak them onto the practice squad. And if something happens, you bring them up. And there's a couple guys that I like in terms of that type of guy. And one of them is Minshew from Washington State, as a guy who's shorter, thick kid, obviously throwing the ball around, been really efficient. And then the other kid, if you're just looking for a tools kind of thing, which I think the Browns may look at, I would look at Drew Anderson, most recently of Murray State, but he was at Buffalo before Tyree Jackson kicked him out. Big kid. I think he's like 6'4", 220-something. And he didn't play very much at Buffalo, but he was a good quarterback. It's just they had, this giant man come in who could run and throw and all this stuff. So he sort of got replaced, but he was effective at Murray State. So I think that's the path that they're going to choose. But I'm fully prepared to be wrong on that and see them go for a veteran. The problem is I just don't see that. And as much as, beyond catastrophic injury, let's say, Baker Mayfield suffers a high ankle sprain and they're saying, can you get through 3 weeks, let's say. Drew Stanton's numbers are horrific, yet for reasons I cannot understand, his record is very good. This team's going to be predicated a lot on defense anyway. They've got a guy like Nick Chubb. I think they can get through a stretch like that with Drew Stanton and not go 0-3. Maybe you go 1-2 and keep yourself in it. But if your guy goes down, this is the thing. I think I don't know if people sort of completely understand how good Baker Mayfield is. That you don't get to like lose a guy like that and be fine. He's that good. He's the guy you like. If you just remember back to what it was like with Tyrod, and it was miserable watching that offense. And part of it, they were clunky. Todd Haley's a bad offensive coordinator. Hugh Jackson's a horrific coach, but weaponry wasn't great. Baker Mayfield just does so much to make everybody better around him, and that's the biggest trait you want in your franchise quarterback. It's hard to really expect that out of a backup unless you're willing to pay major assets in like a situation where like the Saints, gave up a 3rd-round pick for Teddy Bridgewater, who promptly sucked ass when he got in there. And I think Teddy Bridgewater is a decent enough quarterback, but you don't get to lose Breeze and be okay. The same situation. That's where the Browns are at.
The reason why I think I might go ahead and try to find a veteran, I would really, rather than letting Tyrod go to, Tennessee, where he won't be able to start unless, there's an injury there. It's not likely that he would be able to beat out Mariota. I would probably pay him a little bit extra to stay here in like a Nick Foles and Carson Wentz type role. I mean, we're not paying Baker big money. When you talk about like positional allocation, like you have money to spend at that position. If you're and in my opinion, that's, obviously once you lose Baker, you're at a disadvantage, but if you have a good enough team, you still should be able to win games. And to me, like Drew Stanton, yes, win-loss, fine, but he's just not a good quarterback. I mean, he's Coach Stanton to me, and that's it. He's the highest paid quarterback coach in the league, and I would like to see something better. But I hope they are able to find somebody. But I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, if they end up picking one of these guys day 3 and then going with that. But I think we have the money there to do it. So let's go ahead and get a veteran in here. Even a guy like Fitzpatrick, who comes over with Monken maybe, and you get him for 1 year and, can work with Baker a little bit. So a veteran like that, not Matt Hasselbeck. I saw he was saying that people mentioned that they were talking about him coming in for some snaps, but so not somebody like that old, but there's guys out there that should be able to come in and give you quality snaps if need be.
They do have financial flexibility. Ryan Fitzpatrick makes more sense to me than Tyrod would if they were to try to bring somebody in. Obviously, he more familiarity and I think as much as Hugh Jackson is poison to quarterbacks, I expect, in addition to just wanting to play, I think there's probably an element of Cleveland just has not worked out for Tyrod. He's been great as a human being. He does all kinds of work off the field, and he's been great with the fans. He's like everything you'd want him to be. It just didn't work. But Ryan Fitzpatrick could make sense. But I'll be damned if you're gonna criticize Coach Stanton, who occasionally wears pads to practice in training camp. But yeah, I mean, look, if you go by his numbers, he's dreadful. But again, for whatever reason, they make it okay. But yeah, it's an option. It's absolutely an option. I mean, the problem is I don't think you can plan around the idea that you're going to get a Foles type situation. But yeah, Fitzpatrick, if he wants to follow Monken around and like that could be a viable avenue, because part of the thing I think is going to happen is I don't think the Browns are going to end up being huge spenders in free agency. And that's not because the Browns don't want to. I just don't think there's enough there so that could open up an opportunity for them to get a guy like Fitzpatrick.
Now that would we could branch off and go deep into the free agency, but I know we want to hit up the coaches and the draft, so we'll shy away from doing that. Adam, do you want to get back to the coaches here? I'm sorry for leading us down that alley of backup quarterback. We're talking backup quarterback like we're Tony Grossi here on Surviving the Season Today.
Oh yeah, you're right. We opened the show with backup quarterback.
I apologize to everyone.
There's about 3 listeners left.
Todd Monken, coming in under Freddie, who will be offensive coordinator. Steve Wilks, defensive coordinator. A lot of changes in the coaching room. Ryan Lindley moves up to quarterbacks coach, and Adam Henry retained for wide receivers coach, and pretty much everybody else is new. Let's hit the top two guys here, Monken and Wilks, seen as good hires around the league. Where are you guys at with we haven't even talked about this yet, Greg, so you can go on record here with your OCDC picks.
Todd Monken obviously is one that I really like. I mean, we looked at that. We talked about that a number of times. Like, if you can get this guy in there. I don't know if you saw the Jake Burns breakdown from yesterday. He broke it down on how much it fits with what Freddie's trying to do. So it seems a good fit in that aspect of it. It just seems like he is a guy that is working with the analytics to say, hey, how do we get advantages? He's following a lot of those steps that they're going through, throwing early and first down and running when it's second down and short. That's those sort of things. I don't know enough about the Stephen Wilks. I mean, what is he only got one full year as a defensive coordinator where he actually called plays? Is that correct?
It might be.
I think he only called him 1 year in Carolina, right? Because he didn't call. He wasn't calling plays last year for Arizona.
That part, I mean, he's still setting the defense, whether he's actually making the calls or not. Like, that part doesn't concern me.
Okay. So
Wilks,
I'm unsure what to really expect there. I mean, it seems like everybody likes it, but we come down to coaches. I just don't know what to expect until we see them get out in the field and actually see what they're going to call.
Right. That's the important part about this is, unlike with the draft and some of these other stuff where there's just, an unbelievable amount of information, with coaches, particularly assistant coaches, it's really hard to know what they're doing, what they want to do, and what they're forced to do based on what they have or don't have. My early impression with Wilks is, at the very least, he's more likely to scheme around the talent he has rather than force a system on them. In Carolina, he had 3 linebackers that were really good in terms of what they could do with Thomas Davis, Luke Kuechly, and Shaq Wilson, even if the last one was more of a safety than a linebacker. But when he had that year, it was the Panthers and the Browns played the most 3 linebacker sets. And then last year with Carolina, he played almost exclusively 5 DBs because that's what he had. That part is positive. I mean, I don't know, how much is really going to change. Guys like Jabril Peppers are where I'm concerned with any defensive coordinator hire is how do you maximize that? How do you keep that going in a good direction? How do you basically not risk limiting him to a point where he's still a good player, but he's not as good as he could be? Monken, I like the fact that he is a guy who's really good at scheming the passing game and creating opportunities and advantages in that, which is something that Freddie Kitchens does well. I don't think Todd Monken will be here very long, but in the role he's in, I think he has a value. I think he could be very good for Baker Mayfield, even if it's just that 1 year. And having that type of a guy around your play caller and a guy who's going to set the offense can be an advantage, and one I hope this team takes full advantage of. So there's a lot of unknown with both of these guys, but I feel like I like the direction it's headed in terms of being open-minded and being more of a collaborator, which I think Freddie Kitchens has clearly established himself to be, as opposed to our way or the highway type guys, which is more of what the Browns had with Hugh Jackson and Greg Williams. And the last thing I'll mention is I'm hoping like hell that we get better linebacker play out of this coaching staff. That would be on its face would be a massive improvement, because the Williamses were poison to linebackers. And I know there's a lot of consternation about like bringing Kirksey back and the money he's going to cost and all this. First, I don't think you're getting away from it. I think he's going to be back and start, because I think you're on the hook for 10.3 if you cut him. And I think he's good enough to play. I'm sure he's not happy with how his season turned out between the injury and just being ineffective. But I do think some of that is in large part due to the way they were utilized. And I think if they can get better coaching from that standpoint and better in terms of scheme, you're going to see an even better Joe Schobert and hopefully a more than capable guy in Chris Kirksey while you try to sort of find guys to ultimately take over for him and improve the unit.
You know, when it comes to Freddie, he said he's still going to be calling the plays here, but Monken is going to be his OC. He said he wanted to have somebody that was going to be his offensive coordinator. Now, do you have any idea what Monken would be doing then if he's not calling the plays? Like, how much involvement is he going to be having? Is it almost like assistant offensive coordinator more than he's actual offensive coordinator? Or how the hell is that going to work?
His job is still huge. It's just the fact he's not calling the plays is, whatever. But he's still going to be largely in charge of forming the game plan. He's still going to be in Kitchen's ear as he's calling the play, making suggestions, telling him what he sees, all that type of stuff. So that's a major job. Like, I'm sure Kitchen's going to be involved in game planning, but if he wants to be, it allows him to be more of a floater in terms of managing the entire team as opposed to just focusing on offense. That has a massive value to him. And obviously that's something that Monken's been very good at. So even if it's just sort of helping establish the game plan and stuff like that, that's enormously important. But it's not to minimize play calling, because obviously that matters quite a bit, as you saw with the difference between a moron and Freddie Kitchens. But it's more about what you go into the game with. And the other part that Monken's going to be more in charge of is those adjustments. You get into the half. The coaches call plays, but it's not always easy for him to sort of, because of the amount of stuff he has to do during a game. The coordinators and the assistants are really more going to be about the guys who are going to make those adjustments, those changes, seeing what they're doing. And obviously Monken's going to be the eye in the sky on that. So he's going to have a better sense of being able to do that. So no, as much as people will try to reduce his impact and give more credit to Freddie Kitchens, which is whatever, no, Monken's job will be significantly important.
We gave our opinions on Freddie our last show, but we really didn't get to hear what you thought, Pete. Where are you at with Freddie Kitchens as head coach?
I mean, I like the hire, but I don't know. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it hits you right in the feels. It's great from that, easy story to like, and certainly you can admire the impact he had. And I think there's certain things that he did last year that will carry over. I think the way the offense flowed and the things he was able to do, I don't see that changing, which is why I always thought there was less of a risk of a sugar high from wearing off with him than opposed to Greg Williams. But other than that, I mean, and the other thing is, I know a lot of people were worried about him going from barely a coordinator to being the head coach, but he's been an assistant in multiple stops. So he actually has more experience doing that stuff than he does the coordinator stuff. So that doesn't bother me. Is it going to work? I don't know. I mean, it all sounds good, but it always all sounds good initially.
Yeah, right.
The difference, I think, is in the past, they got to basically, and this is what the roster does for you. This is what having a Baker Mayfield does. This is what having Myles Garrett and all those guys does. Is I think any other coaching hire, whether it was Hugh Jackson or Mike Patton or whatever, I think there would be a ton of juice for them getting to basically pick coordinators and pick assistants as opposed to who's left. That in itself feels like a positive, but we've got to see how these guys work together. We got to see the one, and I don't know if it's a concern. It's just sort of a thing that has happened. They got a ton of dudes in there.
Yeah,
particularly on defense. And I think it'll be okay. But there is a point where you do start to wonder if you have too many guys. And it's not so much that like you're worried that guys are going to be going against each other. It has everything to do with if you tell a player to do something and he hears it from 4 different guys and they all say it differently, then you get into this worry about cross coaching and the player doesn't take the right message. It's the biggest difficulty they're going to have is making sure that they always have the same message in terms of the guys working at the same position. So there's no confusion and that it stays cohesive. The other thing that is going to happen, I think, given where this team is going to have is the Browns are now the team that's going to get picked apart for assistants. I think Monken's gone in a year. Be great to get 2 out of him, but I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think that's the end of the world. I don't think hiring him is a mistake because of that, because I think that's just what's going to be happening. Steve Wilks, I think, has a few years before he's going to get another shot, at least. I think Arizona was a shit show and not entirely his fault, but he, obviously it didn't look good from his standpoint either. But I do think, when it looks like the Ravens are going to get an extension done with Harbaugh, but when Mike Tomlin gets canned, if Zach Taylor fails or whatever, that teams like the Steelers are going to be now looking at the Browns for potential assistants to take over, and that's obviously a new situation because it's always been the Browns that have sort of been looking at these other guys, and obviously Hugh Jackson was a Cincinnati assistant. Everybody has been interested in various assistant coaches on teams within the division, and that's now where the Browns are going to be, and that's going to be a different challenge. Is how are the Browns going to be able to adjust, reload without losing anything, and sort of adding and getting the benefit of the various new coaches that they're going to have to bring in.
Right. Yeah,
it was interesting with the assistant coaches how many places they went to find guys. Alabama defensive coordinator came in. I think they got another guy, maybe out of Tennessee.
CFL.
They got the tight ends coach out of Tennessee. They've got what is a defensive. I think they're calling him a special advisor, who was the GA when Freddie was at Alabama. Out of the CFL, and I'm still confused by the conversion rate of that you're like, I'm the GM and the head coach of a CFL team, and I'm like, I'm good. I'm going to go be a special advisor in the NFL. And the same thing with, some of these college switches that and maybe Tosh Lapui was going to get pushed out, and that's sort of why he left. But it does seem a little, at least, weird that, the defensive coordinator would leave Alabama to be the Browns defensive line coach. And I don't know how good he is, because every time I've ever heard his name, whether it was USC or Alabama, it's always been led with, well, he's a great recruiter, which may not be as useful in the NFL.
No, I don't think so.
So that stuff's interesting. But they do have guys from all different kinds of fields, which could be great because, again, you have a coach in Freddie Kitchens who's willing to listen, who likes ideas, who's a collaborator type, and you have guys from legitimately different ways of playing football with the CFL as an example, and different ways they look to deal with things, potentially in coverage that could have a value. Obviously, he's not just been in the CFL. He was at Alabama and some other places, but that does bring a unique perspective and potentially different ideas that could be beneficial. And so much of what the NFL does is borrowed from things like high school through college, and everything starts from the ground up, that now you've got a bunch of guys that have been closer to that and could bring some different perspectives, which I find interesting, but I'm kind of curious to see how it all works. And I never, ever, ever want to be on Hard Knocks again, but that's the type of stuff that would be interesting to me, is to be in the eye in the sky. And as I said with Hard Knocks, I really want to watch it, but I want no one else to. And that's and as clearly that was the reason that we saw why that was the case, because he was a jackass and constantly looked like an asshole. And that's the footage they approved. God knows what they left on the cutting room floor, because the Browns have final say, and they kept that stuff, which made Hugh look stupid. I can only imagine what was left. So it's
you
great.
Still got Building the Browns, Pete. They'll still bring that to you. And they got to keep calling it Building the Browns because we're pretty well built. It's now.
I mean,
shut up a little bit.
I like that stuff, and it's the same way. Like, here's the thing: like, we talk about how big the coaching staff is, and it is, but their front office is enormous, and I think, and that certainly seemed to benefit them. Other than whoever said Chad Thomas could play. But you had
might have been the guy from Miami that's in the front office.
I'm still convinced they thought it was Joe Jackson. They accidentally picked Chad Thomas.
Nice.
But if you think about it, the Browns had, Scott McCloughan as an advisor. They had my guy Andrew Berry carried over from Sashi Brown. They had the analytics guys carried over from the previous regime and still working under Paul DePodesta. They have Alonzo Highsmith. They have Elliot Wolf. They have John Dorsey. They have a million guys. And at least so far, that's been a huge benefit, seemingly, other than the third-round pick. Now they're taking that same approach with the coaching staff, and I do think it's interesting from the standpoint that that they have a head coach who's willing to do that, and they obviously had a GM who's willing to do that. I like the idea that the Browns are like, we're going to get as many smart people in the building as possible and see how it helps us, and that part is legitimately fascinating me. And I don't know if it's going to work, but I at least like the concept of let's get a bunch of smart people in here and see if they help us.
Yeah, I'm wondering with Kitchens being basically first-time head coach, if they wanted to pull some of that experience from around the league. I know they got, I think, the one guy from Green Bay who's been down there for 15 or 20 years. You're bringing in dudes that have been around, that Wilkes has head coaching experience. I think that helps. You just see him bringing in a lot of experience where Kitchens doesn't have a lot, maybe just to help with that as well.
I think it's more coincidence than anything. Not that it's bad, but I think Freddie Kitchens is confident enough in himself that he basically said, who are the best coaches, and got them. And I don't think he said, I don't think there's ever a thought in his head where he went, well, this guy is probably a better coach, but this guy was a head coach, and I want that experience. I think, and I understand the idea that you want veteran coordinators and that stuff, but I think so much of this is just get the best coach. And again, I think that we'll see if it pays off. But if you've listened to Freddie Kitchens talk, I think he's confident enough in himself that he's sort of just said to himself, what's going to help us be the best? And I don't know if he ever thought, well, I've got to get my Al Saunders. I don't.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that guy from the CFL may be that guy because he does have, he does know him. But the thing with Freddie Kitchens is he's been around forever because he basically got into the NFL almost immediately after being a grad assistant and some things. That he's got a huge Rolodex of guys. And I think with like Campen, I expect that was Dorsey going, hey, I've got this guy, you may want to look into him and that type of stuff, which I have no problem with. But I do think the network that he's created is a huge advantage for him in terms of getting coaches. And if you go back and you think about, one of the things that hurt John DeFilippo is the thought was he wasn't ready yet because he hadn't established that network of guys that he couldn't necessarily hire the great staff. And that's, I think, one of the underrated or maybe underplayed things that Freddie Kitchens really has going for him that helped him sort of bring in these guys.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. The other thing that I just absolutely love about Freddie is especially after you listen to his press conferences, he's the anti-Hugh when it comes to just not giving a shit and only caring about team and wins. He doesn't care about credit. He doesn't self-promote. He brought up all this stuff. He just wants to win, and it's about we. And that is the most anti-Hugh Jackson thing that I've ever seen. So I absolutely love that aspect of it too. Yeah,
and that's apparently a big thing with Monken too. He's not a credit guy. But the other part with Freddie Kitchens is that he doesn't care about the bullshit. Like every opportunity he's had to sort of address quote unquote antics Baker Mayfield has had on the field, he's basically said, I don't give a shit. I just want to win. And he wins and he has fun. And that's great because not only does that sort of end it, even though they're going to keep asking, it's a great short answer. It clearly gives Baker Mayfield support that he's going to want and crave. Like the last thing you want is to have him, well, I don't want him to do this, this, and this. He basically is encouraging Baker Mayfield to be Baker Mayfield, which is exactly what you want and going to help build that trust. But it also sort of, I think, helps in the locker room in general that there's this sense where he's not sitting there using the public to call out guys or whatever. And we'll see. Maybe that changes. But at least for now, I like the way he's sort of handling that type of stuff.
Yeah, we're still in the honeymoon phase here. So yeah, of course we're gonna love every aspect of it. We did. We didn't have our show yet when Hugh Jackson, but if you recall, Hugh Jackson getting the standing ovation from the Browns employees when the first time he walked into the building, and I can't remember many negative things being said about him. So to me, it's still wait and see. But I so far so good is where I'm at personally.
How is the Hugh World Order going?
I think he's looking at Arizona right now. Is he not?
That's nice. I just remember how great the Hugh World Order was going to be. But yeah, I would love to see him have to coach Josh Rosen, because Josh Rosen might punch him in the face.
So I've got one more point here on this restructure, and then we can move on some draft eligible guys. Maybe the most underrated part of this is we've got rid of the 2-line communication to Jimmy Haslam. Kitchens will now report to Dorsey. Hopefully that stops some of this backdoor bullshit that we had with Hugh. I think that's going to benefit this organization a ton.
There's no question. I mean, look, if nothing else, this says that John Dorsey has skin in the game in Freddie Kitchens. Like, there's no getting around the fact that this is Dorsey's hire, and however many other people you want to put in that mix. But the fact is that Dorsey's got to answer for it if it doesn't work. So that's important. And obviously, the less people talking to Haslam, the better. There's no question that's a benefit.
Let's hit some draft guys. I don't know how you guys want to break this down.
First let's just sort of talk about what we need. I mean, I listed as the most important things, defensive line, that's defensive tackle and defensive end. Defensive tackle obviously being the most important, offensive tackle right there on top of the list, linebacker, and then secondary wide receiver and cornerback. Does anybody want, it's a lot of positions. Anybody want to add to any of the needs? Because then we'll start banging them out that way. You guys good with those?
No, this is as easy, in terms of needs as this team has been in a long time.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Everybody's watched. Anybody that watches the Browns knows that we're struggling interior defensive line. So let's start there. The first thing I want to ask, Pete, is when you're looking at these guys, the style of defense we're probably going to play it looks like an even front again. Looks like a 1 and a 3. When I see Ogunjobi this year, maybe it's just me. Is Ogunjobi losing weight? He looks thinner this year. I don't know what it is. Super quick. Is he too light that you seem to like him there at the 1? You love him there at the 1, but explain to me why that's his better fit than the 3.
It's a massive advantage to have him at the nose, because that means you're free now to have a, what you hope would be a stud, 3 technique. I mean, if you get sort of a traditional nose, and it's just guys who can consistently disrupt the pocket and be a pass rusher from nose are few and far between. That's a bitch to find. Those guys are legit superstar type players that do it, and you can basically name the few of them on one hand, and one of those guys right now is Ndamukong Suh. Like, that's the type of impact that player can have. And if you say, the name that's going to be thrown around a lot is Gerald McCoy. Like, if you were to add Gerald McCoy, he's your 3. Like, that's what Ogunjobi allows you to do. That if you put Ogunjobi at the 3, and now you have to get sort of more of a clogging guy, it's a dirty work job. It's exhausting, and it's not easy to consistently not just strive for, but work hard enough to demand that 2 guys block you, and do it well. It's not that Ogunjobi loses weight. It's if you've actually ever walked up to see the defensive line in person, he's one of the smallest guys. He just is. Like, he's not. I mean, obviously, if you've seen him like lifting and stuff, he's not carrying a bunch of weight. But he doesn't need to either, because he's just such a gigantic pain in the ass that, it's just I'm sure there's people who are sitting there, well, let's add 20 pounds to him, but he's able to do what he's able to do. I don't want to mess with it. My only concern with Ogunjobi is they literally ran him into the ground. And for people, and I know you guys were among them, we all were saying, look, you cannot play these guys this many reps. And if you break Ogunjobi's season down into segments, you have fresh Ogunjobi, who was a dominant force early in the year. I mean, when he was like, him and Myles Garrett basically had combined for something like 11 sacks at one point in the year, and they were basically leading the league at that point. And then he wore down, and then finally was playing with the torn bicep, and he's still able to do his job, but, you know, obviously not where you'd like him to be. I love what he brings. I love the type of player he can be. I just want him to have enough help where they can actually keep him fresh, and he's not playing 90% of snaps up to, you know, week 8 or whatever it was, until they finally had to put in other guys just because they were dead. And the Myles Garrett's in the same boat. It was incredibly reckless, and I think a big reason why you had to, or a big argument for why you would get rid of Greg Williams is they just recklessly got rid of the line to the point where they had nothing left. So that's gonna be the big thing is not only addressing getting more pass rushers, it's going to be just getting guys who can get in there. And I'd like to get a nose that can give you a little something. It doesn't need to be like a, you know, 350-pound fat kid in there, unless that's really what Steve Wilks wants. But you need somebody who can give him a break and at least still provide a credible clogging mentality, which is why I always thought it was weird that they were so quick to give up Jamie Meter, because that's all he did. And then they added the dude from the Baltimore Ravens who never played.
Yep, and I can't think of his name right now, but I agree. Carl Davis, thank you. Right, so okay, and with that, so we're looking for more of a 3. Some of the guys, I mean, Quinnen Williams obviously is going to fit there. He's not going to be there. Jeffrey Simmons could be there because of his off-field issues, but it's probably unlikely. Ed Oliver, probably unlikely. Out of those 3, those would be the top 3 guys. And are you on board with that too, Pete? From that defensive tackle position. I know you don't like Jeffrey Simmons.
Well, no, it's clearly Ed Oliver and Quinnen Williams. I'm not sure that you're going to end up saying that Jeffrey Simmons is the third guy, and it's not based on his domestic violence issue, or not even domestic violence, the assault issue they played not guilty for entering high school or leaving high school, going to college. There may be guys that are just as good, and the one that comes to mind is like just from production, and I mentioned this on Twitter the other day. Is all these people are like, I think they're putting the cart before the horse on Jeffrey Simmons, basically saying he's this elite prospect. If not for this, I think they're getting ahead of themselves and saying, you know, he's this phenomenal prospect. But like a guy like Gerald Willis III from Miami, who's also not Chad Thomas, had, you know, at least from a production standpoint, like basically the same numbers area where he, you know, the tackles, solo tackles for loss were great. Sacks were not where you'd want them to be. That's the same thing with Simmons. And my concern with Simmons is if you compare it to a guy like Larry Ogunjobi had a better prospect profile than Simmons is going to, and went in the 3rd round. You're now suggesting to me, if you're one of these people who's saying, well, they should take Simmons at 17, that theoretically you're going to be taking a guy who's not as good as Ogunjobi as a prospect 2 rounds earlier than you took Ogunjobi. And that's where it becomes difficult for me. So I'm not sold that he's the surefire number 3 guy. Okay. And I'm not sold that he's worth what, even if you expunge the idea that the assault ever happened. He's an obviously very talented player. I don't think he's a 3. I think he's a 1. Okay. He's a big old wrecking ball in there who just moves bodies around. And if you watch his tape, you can see him be a disruptor. It's not to say he can't play 3. It's just a different style defense. And maybe that's what Wilks wants. That he wants.
He's 300, every bit of 300 pounds, it looks like. I mean, again, you know, we have to wait for the testing too. I mean, we're just going off of what we've seen on video so far. But, you know, this guy, he could be test off the charts, or he could test terribly, and it's going to move him up and down one way or the other. And all of these guys. So much of it right now, we're sort of just getting them in place of where you think before the testing. But Simmons definitely has a lot more size, especially than the other guy that you had said, who's only like Gerald Willis is like an undersized guy.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much, and we'll see what he weighs and stuff, how much Gerald Willis is very similar to Larry Ogunjobi.
Yeah.
And this is one of the questions we have. If Greg Williams was still here, it'd be very easy to identify what he's going to want. And his name's Ed Oliver, and I want him on this team, as would Greg Williams. I don't know if that's a Steve Wilkes type guy. I mean, I think that dude is an absolute monster and may end up still being one of the best prospects in the draft when athletic testing comes out. I don't think he's going to do anything to do anything to doubt that.
Are you talking by like pure, like a one gap, just pure like he's getting through, or what do you call that?
He's a penetrator. Yeah, he's an upfield.
Is that what you mean? You were just unsure of what Steve Wilkes is going to want to pick up as his task.
So let's look at it from this standpoint. Let's compare it. Does Steve Wilkes want something akin, does he want something akin to the Baltimore Ravens, where they've got those two big whales in there who just, they're going to move you backwards and reestablish the line of scrimmage? Or does he want, guys who can get up and shoot gaps and stuff like that? And I don't know if we have the answer to that. I mean, I know people are looking back at Carolina and saying that he had this and he did this, but he didn't pick any of those things. That's what he had. You had K1 Short, you had Star Lotulelei. It's not like he drafted those guys; those were what he had, so that's what he used. In Arizona, right. 1 year, he didn't add a bunch of guys; he just used what he had. So, that's the question. And he's now in a position where he can, John Dorsey's going to come and say, "Well, what do you want? I've got this guy." I don't know what he's going to say. If he wants more of an Ed Oliver type, or if he wants more of a Jeffrey Simmons type. That's one of the questions that becomes interesting. But just from a prospect standpoint, Ed Oliver, Quinnen Williams, and then I think there's a bunch of guys in the mix for that next spot. And it's going to be curious to see how they sort of shape out. I think Simmons has a very good chance to be the number 3 guy, but I don't think it's for sure.
Well, you are right. I agree with you. I think they are completely. There's those penetrators. There's a number of them in this draft. Ed Oliver, Quinnen Williams is a little bit of everything. Like, he's just fucking good. What's his name from Ohio State? Draymond Jones is another one, undersized guy, but he's quick to get through. And these guys can. I just feel like this is a really deep group, depending on what exactly you're looking for. The other guy who's just a damn good player, but this would be the opposite of that. What about like a guy like Christian Wilkins? What do you think of him from Clemson? Production
isn't where you want him to be, but he's just been a really good player for Clemson for years. He's off field. He's a dream. Super intelligent, which would fit in with what the defensive line has already. The other thing that'll be interesting to look out for with him is his arm length. It's a small thing, but if he's stubby, that makes it a little more difficult. But he's got to test like a badass. He just has to. And I think the argument can be made that he runs hot and cold. I think you saw the best of what Christian Wilkins has to offer in the playoffs. When the motor is running, he's just a beast, and you saw that. But there are games where he does disappear, and I think the consistency angle is a question, as the fact that he never put up elite production. And certainly the argument can be made that by going back that, there were times this year, as happens with some of these guys, is he basically was going through the motions until, it had to happen. And then when it did, he was great and they won the national championship, which really came back for. But that's one of those where athletic testing's going to really determine how much you're going to want him. But I certainly understand why people like him. Great kid. That's you're not gonna get complaints from me, because I hate how Dorsey seems to be betting on the character guy, that you go the exact opposite way and you get these fantastic human beings in your building that just make the group better.
Right. I just don't understand where, like we said, where the Browns are going. But Christian Wilkins, like, he's a solid player, but it seems like that style of guy, you just don't have to draft high in the league anymore. Unless you're getting, to me, it's like you get either the guy that's a quick penetrator like Ed Oliver, the everybody brings up Aaron Donald. You're not going to find another Aaron Donald. He's that good. Like he's once in a lifetime kind of player, but you're looking for that. And I just don't know if you have to take a guy who's just a solid all around player that stops the run, really doesn't get a lot of pressure. Do you want to even draft him at 17? Do you want to take a guy? Can you wait? And it seems like in this draft, we're going to be able to wait if need be. Even better is if we go and are able to get a guy like Gerald McCoy. I would still be drafting a defensive tackle. You get Gerald McCoy, I'm still taking a defensive tackle somewhere in this draft. Where are you at with that, Pete?
I'm not only am I still drafting a defensive tackle, I may still draft a defensive tackle at 17.
Okay, right.
I cannot have the Eagles are the model I'm looking for. If you have your quarterback, you have most of what of an offensive line you want. You have I think the secondary is more stable than anything else on defense right now, which is probably going to fly in the face of some people think. I think the defensive line needs more work, and I think you have to get to a point. Look, the goal here is now it's not rebuilding anymore. It is now building to when you're going to make your run for the Super Bowl. And the Browns have a sweet spot for 4 years where they have all this ability to make that run. And I think you have to get 8 guys that you can count on the defensive line. And the Browns have about 5 or 6, maybe 6. And almost none of those are defensive tackle other than Ogunjobi. So I'm looking to say I want 3 guys that are rotating all the time at defensive tackle where you're always going to have a stud on the field, what you feel is a stud on the field. Same with defensive end. I want at least 3 guys where you're always – in that case, it's more 4. I want always to have 4 guys that you have on the field and you feel good about it. And obviously, there's a little bit of versatility where you can have a guy like Myles Garrett play both. But reality is you're going to say – not only is it just what you saw this past year where your guys just got exhausted from being overused, if you barely made through the 16 games you played. Now you're planning on playing 20 or 19 if you get the bye, but you're planning on playing 19 to 20 weeks. You've got to be able to save your guys and keep them to where their best football is now going to come in January, and if everything goes according to plan, February. So that's all the more reason you need as many guys as you can get up front, and you just I don't care what side of the ball it is. You cannot have too many talented 300-pound men. You just can't. They win you football games, and you see that. And like I think the Eagles Saints playoff game changed the second Fletcher Cox went down, and obviously he's one of the best in the game. Mm-hmm. But whether it's Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, Fletcher Cox, which are all in the playoffs this past week, and 2 of those are still in it, those guys win you football games, and they're certainly going to win you more football games than a receiver is. They're certainly going to win you more football games than some of these other positions. So if the value continues to be right, and whether it's the first round, the second round, or whatever. I've come into this draft process, whether it's free agency or whatever, where I'm looking at getting 3 to 4 to 5 new defensive linemen to add to what you already have, and hoping guys like Ogba, for the love of God, can have some luck and be healthy. That you get all these guys going on full all their cylinders, because you want to be able to say to a guy like Emmanuel Ogba that if he's battling a high ankle sprain, that he can rest and actually get better relative to where he was at, as opposed to having played the entire season at 75, 80%, because they have no one else to put out there.
Good point. So just thinking about that with the extra games, say we would have went to the Super Bowl. I mean, Myles would have been at like 1,300 snaps for the year if they would have kept up that. This poor guy can't get a break. Give me a couple names, Pete, that you like that maybe flying under the radar that people can check out on with the defensive tackles.
I think a lot of them just played in the Shrine Game. The guys I'm looking at, I think Daniel Wise. Obviously, if you've paid attention to the Shrine Game coverage, he was a guy who had a great week. I'm interested in Cortez Broughton from Cincinnati, who was down there too. basically he's a frumpy looking guy that makes plays. Like he's 6'2", 290 or something. Like his body looks. He looks like a little fat kid, and he's
a Cincinnati kid.
Yeah, okay. Bearcat, and he had elite production, and he's a problem. And he's a guy I think that might actually be able to fill in at some nose if he can get his pad level more consistent. The guy that interests me and his production wasn't where I was hoping it would be is Jerry Tillery.
I was going to bring him up. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about his Stanford tape. Goddamn. Did he that was one of the most impressive games I saw from anybody. I watched 2 films of him. One was Stanford. I was like, this guy's unstoppable.
Yeah. If you watch him against Stanford and Michigan, he was the best player on the field. He just absolutely dominated, and his length is imposing. He's like 6'6", we'll see what he actually measured. He's listed at 6'7" at one point. So if he's 6'5" and change, he's a big, long guy. In some ways it looked like he's still figuring out his body. He's got to learn counter moves and stuff, but he just flashes explosive power, some quickness. And then because he's so damn long, quarterbacks try to run away from him, and he just reaches out or leans over, and he's got him. He's a young kid. Notre Dame, obviously, he's got the age you'd like to have. I just think there's a lot going for him if he tests right. That especially if you get a guy like a Gerald McCoy or whatever, that you add this guy to the mix, and while he's figuring it out, you don't have to rely on him. He's got a lot of ability. And the other dude, there was one other dude that was at the Shrine game that's another undersized pass rusher whose name escapes me right now. But there are a lot of guys who are in the 280, 85 pound range that you don't need to start, but can come in and contribute for third down and stuff like that, which I think the Browns need. I think that was something that they lacked this year. And I think you can find guys like that on day 3. But those are guys that are standing out to me, and I think we're only going to find more as we go. The bottom line for me is I'm still living in an era of unbridled enthusiasm where I see people like Daniel Jeremiah mock Ed Oliver 14th, and I can't help but think that I can jump up there and go get him and add a guy who has what I think has a chance to be that Aaron Donald type player.
Okay, I like it. So let's move to the ends, but first I'm going to hit a couple guys and see where maybe tweeners, see where you think they are. One being Zach Allen from Boston College, the other Rashawn Gary from Michigan. Do you like these guys as edge guys or inside?
I like them both inside. I like the kid from Iowa who's going to be at the Senior Bowl this coming week on the inside too.
Anthony Nelson.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I don't like Charles Omenihu on the inside too.
Damn it, Pete! That's what I was going to ask you about. That was the other one on my list. I really like him.
Production-wise, they're more suited for inside. I think Nelson has an enormous frame. Zach Allen, I think he's a lot like Emmanuel Ogbah, and that he can play both. But there's things I'd love to ask him because he plays with so many different stances. But I've been anytime I've watched him, I've been most impressed by the way he explodes out of being a 3-tech and being undersized, but having the strength to be able to be credible in there. That he, and I think a lot of people expect him to be a first rounder. He just has a way that just makes him explosive out of there, and I think that becomes a huge problem. But like Ogbah, he could conceivably play end and tackle, but based on what I've seen, I like all those guys better on the inside. Where
does Zach Allen, real quick, Pete? Where does Zach Allen hit? Does he hit like your thresholds for production? Because he only had 6.5 sacks.
If you go to his junior year, he's good.
Okay.
Rashawn Gary, I think is the 3 technique. I don't think he wants to be a 3 technique. I think Rashawn Gary is driving me insane with the way that he messed around with his body and screwed his junior year, and I think somebody's going to draft him way too early. And I hope that team's not the Browns. Again, Daniel Jeremiah. It's January. It's whatever. But he had him going number 2 to the 49ers, and to me that strikes me as a very 49ers pick. If they want to get very little out of it, add another guy that really doesn't do as much to the defensive line as you hope. But And the thing with Rashawn Gary is he's not polished at all. He doesn't know how to use his body in terms of keeping his hands free and stuff like that. He doesn't really have a lot of moves. He just wins because he's physically bigger and stronger than other guys. And I think you can get away with that a hell of a lot more on the inside than you can on the outside. I think your best bet is to say, if you've got this superimposing physical threat, you want him as close to the ball as possible. And I don't know. Let's put it this way. I'll be fascinated to see what he comes in at the combine. If he's messing around at 265, I think he's doing himself a disservice. I think he'd get up to 290 easily and just be an absolute force. But again, I think he messed around with his body too much this year. I don't know who was in his ear, but I don't think it worked out for him. Obviously missed a bunch of time with injury and stuff like that, but just not the year I think he was hoping to have.
Okay, yeah, and you mentioned Charles Omenihu from Texas. Now he looks like he could really add some weight. Like I want to see what he measures in that. The one question I had about him is he's got 4 years, but I don't have an age on him. I don't know if he's older. I don't know if he's younger. Nobody knows how old this kid is. At least it hasn't been posted yet. I haven't seen it. But I really liked his get off. I like him a little bit more at edge so far, but I don't know. They sort of play like an odd front there at Texas
and Iowa. Both those teams play that weird odd front, and both teams have these guys who are absolutely dominating at these body types where they're just enough to make you go, I'm not sure. That's going to be one of the things, especially in Mobile this week, is where are they going to put them? I expect they're both probably going to be at end, but I'll be curious to see if, they move them around a little bit to see where they're more comfortable. Personally, I've watched more of Nelson than I have Omenihu. I don't think his hips are great for edge. I think he's more of a guy who can generate power, but that'll be something that's worth keeping an eye on is both these teams. And there's a lot of these teams running systems like this where they can get a stud like this to put up big numbers, and then you project him to the NFL and you're sitting there going, well, he could be a hell of a base end. Maybe he should be a defensive tackle, and maybe he's neither one. And that's going to be one of the things that find out, which makes this draft class fun. I think there's a lot of guys like this where you have to answer the question of where do you put them.
Yeah, I haven't watched any Anthony Nelson yet, so I'm going to get to that. Now let's sort of switch to the guys that are more traditional, like 4-3-N, Cleveland Farrell. I would say him, Bosa. What do you think Bosa's size is going to be? He's not as big as his brother was.
I think he's probably going to be about 265, but good. Maybe he'll add a bunch of – I mean, the advantage he has, for better or worse, is that, when he had the sports hernia and everything, or what certainly sounds like a sports hernia, I don't know if it was ever confirmed, that he's been training doing nothing but that since he's been sitting out and after the recovery. And I don't begrudge him at all for doing it, but that should be interesting. The thing is, I don't think he's going to test like an animal. And Bosa didn't either. I mean, he had his three cone was out of this world, but in terms of just raw explosion, that wasn't really Bosa's thing. And that could hurt. That could hurt Nick, who I don't think is going to be as good of a prospect as Joey was. And I think there's a lot more risk here, in part because he didn't produce like Joey did in college. And I know John Costco, if he's listening to this, is sitting there going, well, Pete, you're a jackass. I've shown you the PFF stuff where he's constantly dominating. I understand, but based on what I've seen and read and everything in terms of production, that's something that, if he had played the whole year, he was undoubtedly going to get it. He was absolutely killing it this year. But that's sort of the question you have. Have you seen enough? And it certainly sounds like the NFL has. But I think guys like so many people are saying, well, Nick Bosa could be the number one pick. I'm not sure that. I think Queen and Williams is going to have the better, cleaner profile, and that's going to be the better play for Arizona, but we'll see what happens. And there's put it this way, there's too much for me to say I'm taking him at number one. I would be more inclined to take Williams, and I would be more inclined to take Josh Allen based on what we've seen so far. Good Josh Allen.
In a draft class that is sort of, assuming this draft class is sort of stocked with defensive linemen, do you want to take one high if you can get 2 or 3 dudes down the draft? I'm
not pressing for it. That's for damn sure. It's got to be right, because there are players at other positions that are going to be extremely tempting. If a guy like TJ Hawkinson is sitting there, the tight end from Iowa, at 17, I'm very tempted to draft him and add him and say I have these two guys in Njoku and TJ Hawkinson try and stop me. There are going to be players, and it could be corners, it could be a guy like Byron Murphy, it could be a guy like Greedy Williams if he's sitting there, that are sitting there, or Lane if he tests right for Michigan State, that are going to be super, super tempting. That you could wait, because this draft class does have a lot of depth. But the other part of that is if it's basically Ed Oliver and Queen and Williams and then everybody else, just like running backs last year, I don't think you want to be the first guy at the trough.
Yeah,
I think you can be patient. So the overall answer is it's going to depend. But no, I'm not. As much as I want to add defensive line help, I'm not going to rush. The other part of that is, so many people want a 3-tech, but I mean, if a guy like Polite is sitting there from Florida and he's right, I wouldn't hesitate to grab him or Cleveland Farrell. I don't think he'll last that long, but just as an example, if those guys are sitting there, I have no problem with adding a franchise end on this team and just giving them more guys to go get the passer. Like the options are there, but and the other possibility, and I don't think I'm going to be there on this, but they could also go with an offensive tackle. But those seem like those are the possibilities. It's either going to be a defensive lineman, corner, theoretically a tight end. I don't know if even Dorsey's willing to do that. I would, or getting an offensive lineman. I don't think he's going to be inclined to get a linebacker. I know a lot of people want the kid from LSU, Devin White, who's obviously a really talented player, but that, at least to this point in his career, has not been Dorsey's move. And I think the part of the problem with that is whether you want him or not, you have Kirksey, and I expect you're going to have him. So a Devin White type player, you take him, and then conceivably he's not playing that first, season, or maybe he's only playing sparingly. That's going to feel very unsatisfying, especially if you're one of the people who sitting there pissed off about Austin Corbett, who I think will be fine. But that obviously was a burr in a lot of people's saddles this year, that the idea that the Browns could take a second round pick and not play or start, even though the Browns are to the point where they're really talented, or they're getting way more talented, that they are good enough where they don't automatically start second round picks and whatnot.
Yeah, finally we have that position where we can draft for depth a little bit instead of everyone's got to be a goddamn Pro Bowler year one, or we're fucked.
Yeah, for sure. So Pete, this is some of the, we'll hit more of these as we go along. And so far we've hit defensive tackle. These are the defensive ends here. Pete, give us a couple guys maybe under the radar that you, again, for us to go look up and everybody listening at home to go and do their homework on.
Well, I wish he was under the radar, but he's been projected in the first round. Is Jalen Ferguson from Louisiana Tech. He's got the size. He looks like a franchise defensive end in terms of just physical size. People are going to criticize his schedule fairly. They didn't play anybody, but he just killed everybody they played against.
He's in the Senior Bowl, or he was in the East-West. I can't remember.
Unless he's dropped out. I don't think he has. He's in the Senior Bowl, because this is obviously his time to sort of answer the competition question. O'Shane Zimenez from Old Dominion. If you've actually seen him, he is a muscled up, rocked up dude. He's dominant for Old Dominion. He's still raw, but he looks like a really nice athlete. He's got a test like it, but he was obviously super productive, and it's not. I don't think he's going to get to this point, but there are reasons to think of him in terms of like a DeMarcus Ware, and that's not because he's an elite prospect or whatever. He may be a very nice player. It's that DeMarcus Ware was doing that at a small school at Troy, and in this case Old Dominion, that you've got this absolute monster at a school like that. So that's where that becomes interesting. Let's see He
looks like a man playing boys at Old Dominion. It looks pretty funny if you do get a chance to watch it.
I'm sure there's other guys. The one guy that's kind of interesting to me is I'm going to look him up real quick. There's a kid from Arkansas State that's like small in terms of size, and I haven't seen a ton of tape of him, but production-wise, Raheem Bingham, who at least he's listed 6'2", 242. If you watch his tape, he's just flying around like a wrecking ball, throwing his body around. And he's one of those where you're like worried he's going to hurt himself, but he just blows up people and he's violent. He's fun if you get a chance to watch his tape.
What's the name again? One more time.
Raheem Bingham.
Raheem. Okay, I'm gonna look him up.
And I don't know if he even got invited to anything. Maybe he was at the NFLPA game. I haven't seen anything on that, but he's another guy that's sort of, another one of these guys, small school, but just crushed people. But there's a lot of guys like that in this class, and you're going to see some of those in the Senior Bowl. Sutton Smith was a late add who's a tiny little shit from Northern Illinois, but he just dominated. Now, he may not weigh 240 pounds, but his production is obscene. So there's a lot of guys in that mold that we're going to see. And it's like last year where there's going to be guys like a Jannard Avery, and it's just a question of finding. Like Sutton Smith had 15 sacks. He had 26 and a half tackles for loss this year. Just dominant. So there's a lot of guys in that mold, and athletic testing will sort some of these guys out in terms of how much they weigh and stuff like that. But a lot of good players, and I don't think he's under the radar either. But Montez Sweat is being overshadowed by Jeffrey Simmons, and he's another undersized guy, but he actually does have elite production that Simmons doesn't. And doing it in the SEC. And the other guy he's overshadowed by is obviously good Josh Allen, who's just a stud.
Yeah.
But Montez Sweat is another guy that could be in that sort of second tier, could potentially go in the first round. But because of the sheer supply of these pass rushers, these edge rushers, that conceivably the Browns could be sitting there at a second and third round pick and have somebody fall to them, or have somebody that strikes their fancy enough to go up and get them. And again, we'll see. I may be putting the cart before the horse, but I think when you have a guy like Baker Mayfield, you're going to be playing with leads. He's that good, and I think you saw how good he was as a rookie. The way they're going to get to a point is Baker Mayfield gets you a lead, and that pass rush has to close and put the game away. And I think there's going to be a reason for them to try to get some of these pure pass rushers, even if they are slightly undersized, if for no other reason. You want basically what amounts to be Yannick Ngakoue from Jacksonville. You get a guy like that, and he doesn't have to start. Certainly, if you get one as good as he is, they will. But you just want guys who are going to come in and go get the quarterback. And when Jacksonville's been good, they've shut down the defense to a point where their Blake Bortles-led offense got them the insurmountable 3-point lead that they can just tee off and go get the quarterback, and a guy like Yannick Ngakoue just feasts. And that's what the Browns need to do. Is they've got a guy like Myles Garrett, they've got a guy like Larry Ogunjobi, and Jannard Avery certainly looks like he can do this. But you get to nickel at second and 11 or third and 8. And you potentially put Myles Garrett at the 3, a guy like Ogunjobi or Ogba or somebody at the 1, and you have Jannard Avery on one side and a guy like, let's say, Montez Sweat or Ja'Kai. I assume it's Ja'Kai. I'm sure I'm butchering that. Polite on the other side, and you basically said who's going to get there first, and that's going to help. Part of the reason the Browns defense was good early, and this was their focus, was turnovers. But as the defensive line got tired, they got less and less turnovers. And if they can keep that pressure up, they can keep making quarterbacks uncomfortable, then those guys are going to get those turnovers, and we're going to see more defensive touchdowns and stuff like that. You have guys like Terrence Mitchell, who's just a dick in the best possible way, that he's going to, not only can he make plays on the ball, but he just strips the ball, and that becomes your sort of who you are on the defense. In a lot of ways, I think Terrence Mitchell sort of established their identity in that way. But Demarius Randall is a guy who can go get the ball. I think Jabril Peppers is going to keep growing into a guy who can get the ball. And then obviously Denzel Ward, these guys are going to create turnovers. And then the guy who will benefit the most from this, in my opinion, would be Joe Schobert, who has already shown he's a guy who can go get passes. But if teams are stupid, or they're just, the quarterback's freaked out by this pass rush, Joe Schobert's the guy who's going to start stealing passes and have a huge year where he looks like a tight end catching passes and running touchdowns.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how. I almost feel like our linebackers are at times over aggressive in Greg Williams. Like he just had them committing to the run a little bit too hard all the time. Like it was number one urgency, and that's kind of what we got picked apart on a lot of times. And maybe if we don't have to play as that aggressive, it gives more opportunities, like you said, for Schobert. You just real quick, one of the things when you're watching these defensive ends that I like to do, I like to look at like good matchups. Like you don't want to see defensive end going up against some scrub, and then that's how you're going to base your opinion on it. So the one guy we were talking about there was Montez Sweat. I initially watched him. I didn't think athletically he was like this freak or anything, but I watched him against Kansas State. Dalton Risner. I don't know if you saw this game or not, Pete, but I thought Montez Sweat actually took it to Risner pretty good. Or I don't know if it's Reisner. It could be Reisner, Dalton Reisner, but he's a well thought of right tackle for Kansas State. If you want to look up a film, Mississippi State versus Kansas State, Montez Sweat was a good one for him.
And that reminds me of the other guy who may be a superstar prospect is D'Andre Walker from Georgia.
Okay.
And you talk about matchups. He beat the shit out of that kid from Alabama in Georgia.
Jonah Williams,
who I think is overrated, but whatever. And it seems like, you're seeing these reports that he's not looked at, and he shouldn't be. But D'Andre Walker from Georgia, an undersized pass rusher type, he beat the hell out of Jonah Williams when Georgia played Alabama. He's another guy who I don't think is getting nearly enough talk, who may end up, if he tests right, may end up being a first-round caliber prospect who doesn't go in the first round, and a team like the Browns could potentially feast on him.
Let's stay on the defensive side of the ball. We'll come back because we're already running late. We'll come back and hit the offensive side of the ball. This is just with our sort of initial preview for the draft. We're gonna do a lot of draft shit going forward. Let's stick with the linebackers here. Now we talked a little bit about Devin White. Chances are the Browns taking a linebacker at 17 is not very likely, I would say. But Pete, talk maybe about some of the guys that under the radar. Maybe basically everybody's under the radar at this point. But maybe talk up a couple guys that you really like at this linebacker group that we get second, third, fourth round.
Yeah, not only do I think Devin White is unlikely to happen, I think it's irresponsible to take that at 17 because there's just too many goddamn good linebackers that you can get, and this class is going to be loaded. I think Devin Bush is overrated as hell, at least on production. But this class, at least from production, is loaded. The kid who I love right now is TJ Edwards from Wisconsin, former teammate of Schobert. He is boxy looking, like he doesn't look like he's a great athlete, and I don't know how he'll test, but he just makes plays. And he had a bunch of I think he had 10 interceptions in his time at Wisconsin. He makes plays all over the field, basically a lot like Schobert, body, like in terms of just listed height and weight, similar. But he may be the best linebacker nobody seems to want to talk about. I like Khalil Hodge. I wish his production was a little bit better, but he's a guy who just was a consistent playmaker at Buffalo. The kid I'm sort of intrigued by in what little I've seen of him. His production's legit, is Blake Cashman from Minnesota. I don't think he knows what he's doing a lot of the time, but he just runs around and causes a problem and just figures out a way to get in and make plays. A big guy. There's just, in general, this class just has a ton of them. I think the Shrine game ended up getting a lot of them. And like one of the guys who Daniel Jeremiah mentioned, if you watch the broadcast, that I'd like to see more of is Shion Takitaki from BYU. He's a big boy that flies around and causes a problem. But there's just a ton of these linebackers. And what I would say to people on this is, because I get a lot of, well, the Browns should take Devin White because they need another linebacker. You have not heard of almost anyone at linebacker yet. And as you go through this, you're going to find that there's a ton of guys that are probably going to be sitting there on day 3, which is exactly where they got Schobert. And, for all the things you can criticize about Greg Williams, they had a lot of success bringing dudes off the street and getting them to at least contribute. And that, I just think linebacker is a position you can find. There's just so many. And because of the way college football is going and the way they're asked to do so many different things now in terms of coverage responsibilities, is they're being really well trained for the NFL, that there's just so many guys out there that you can get. And I know, like, if you think of the best in the NFL, there's not a ton of, like, obviously Luke Kuechly was a top 10 pick. Luke Kuechly was great. Patrick Willis is
he's a freak. Yeah, Luke Kuechly is legitimately a freak.
And Patrick Willis was the same way. But most of these guys are going day 2, day 3. They're not being run up there as first round picks. Linebackers are just not a great investment from that standpoint, because you can just get better value. Just other positions are harder to find. It's more difficult to find great corners. It's more difficult to find impact defensive linemen. That you are always going to be able in a position where you can find guys. I mean, a couple of the last year, there were a bunch of undrafted free agent type guys or 7th round picks I was pounding the table for that freaking kept going to Minnesota. There's just always guys around. So don't fall in love in the first round for linebackers. It's not a good buy.
This might be a little bit, maybe we don't have any answers for this yet because the process is still early, but the Browns are the kind of team now that can maybe start to draft special teams guys. Is there any linebacker secondary guys that have sort of separated themselves from special teams, Pete, or is that something that you're not worried about yet?
Well, I mean, it's not so much not worried, it's just not a ton of information. I mean, I'm sure if you look and you'll find which guys – have been consistently on special teams type units and stuff like that. A kid that stands out potentially would be the kid in the Shrine game yesterday that it's not BJ Bello, but I want to call him BJ Bello.
Yeah, I know.
BJ something out of a small school. He's a linebacker, but he's literally about 200 pounds. But he just runs around and causes a mess. Like, that's the type of guy where I'd be sort of looking at him going, his production's legit, and he's not going to be a regular contributor, but he's the type of guy you can find a home for on special teams. And
BJ Blunt, McNeese.
That's him.
McNeese State.
McNeese State. BJ Blunt. If you watch him, I had no idea. I think he's listed at like 230 or 225 or something, but he measured 202, I think, at the Shrine game. But you find guys like that, and obviously the Browns appear to have gotten really, really fortunate in hitting on Tavier Thomas. That I don't know if you're, again, worried about drafting guys to do it, but you basically find guys who are good linebackers or good whatevers who also happen to do this other thing, as opposed to saying, well, this guy is great at special teams, maybe he can do something else. I think you can find those type of guys who are just special teamers in free agency.
Right on.
Good point. All right, let's move to the corners. Then we'll hit quickly the safeties, and then we'll wrap it up after that and come back and do the offense if you would be willing to do that, Pete.
Is that a question? I assume.
Yeah, no. I mean, if you want to come back, we'll let you know when we're
back. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. Whatever. It's basically a question of how we break up the 4-hour pod. But yeah, I mean, sure.
All right, so go ahead and shoot us some. Before the pod started, we both talked about how much we like Byron Murphy, but he could be there at 17. That could be something they do. I don't know, but give us a couple other. He's a Washington cornerback. Give me a couple other cornerbacks that stuck out to you that you really like. Yeah,
to me, Byron Murphy is West Coast Ward. Different system, but both small guys who just have incredible coverage abilities, and Murphy has made more plays on the ball because that's just what their defense asks him to do. But he's a phenomenal player. The kid that if he tests right, everybody's going to be talking about in the first round is going to be Justin Lane from Michigan State. Justin Lane is a Cleveland kid, but to give you an idea, he had 44 solo tackles. Let's see, which is a good number. He had 15 pass breakups. Only the one pick, but in terms of market share, he just crushes it on all fronts. But he's listed at least at 6'3". And nice. There are a number of guys who are in that boat now. Some of these guys who are former wide receivers. The other one that stands out in that case, and I don't think he's nearly as good as a prospect, but Isaiah Johnson from Houston is legitimately was recruited as a wide receiver that they moved to corner, who's got some ability.
Pete, do you think that's important since Ward is a smaller guy that you get a corner on the opposite side that has more size to him, or do you think it doesn't really matter? If you can play corner, that's all that matters.
I would say there's merits to both. I think the Browns in a lot of ways have that because as much as he sucked ass in the first half of the season, I think TJ Carey was great, or at least much better in the second half. But he gives you that sort of matchup corner option. I think it's irresponsible to say he's just a slot corner because he obviously played specific matchups on the outside and did a great job. He frustrated Julio Jones. He gave DeAndre Hopkins all he could handle. Like, he's just a pain in the ass because he's grabby in the best possible way. I don't know how the Seahawks didn't get him because he's that type of guy. So I think TJ Carey gives you that type of flexibility, but certainly, the one thing I agree with on Mike Lombardi, I doubt there's two, is his and I'm sure he stole it, is his metaphor for saying that, your defensive backfield is a basketball team and you just want to be able to match up different things. And as much as Byron Murphy and Denzel Ward are both just great cover corners, if you're playing against, teams with different types of receivers, and the Chiefs are, obviously you're not going to have, you may have a corner follow around Travis Kelce, but just as an example, you have this obviously huge guy who can make catches in traffic and all that stuff versus a Tyreek Hill who's, a water bug, speedy guy that, having the same type of corner can have its drawbacks in that. You certainly like the prospect of having matchups. However, at the end of the day, you just want two good corners. So you can't – it basically comes down to, if you're saying that corner A is 6'1", 200 pounds and does all these things, is just as good or just slightly worse than corner B, who's 5'11", 180 pounds, and you're saying, well, we have this other guy who's already small and we want to go bigger, then go ahead. But if you're saying that – this smaller corner is, he's basically, 5 spots better than the bigger corner, then you're cutting off your nose to spite your face by saying that we're this worried about size that we're not going to just take the better player.
Right. So, you're betting on these guys. You brought that up earlier. Like, I can't remember what player you're talking about, but that's what you're doing. So you're taking a gamble each time. So you're going to weigh. You have to weigh each aspect of that differently, and of course, you're just gonna want to take the more talented player whenever possible.
Yeah, Justin Lane, he's a Benny's kid, Benedictine High School for people who don't live around here. But yeah, he's we'll see how he tests. He may run slow, but even if he were to run slow, like, his production profile is so good that at the very least he's going to be probably a starting caliber corner in the NFL. If he can run, then suddenly he's going to be, a freak show type corner. But this is, another position where there's just a million of these kids that can do stuff. Chris Boyd, I'll be honest, I don't know how much some of these guys are talked about. I just haven't paid that much attention. But like Chris Boyd from Texas and Amani Oruwariye, whatever, how you pronounce that, are both big corners slated to participate in the Senior Bowl. Amon Marshall's another big corner, who are guys that at some point in their career had excellent production profiles. And that's where it starts for me. So, some of these guys may be really highly thought of and I just don't know, or they will be really highly thought of. But the one I would say is Lane. If he's starting to catch a little bit of attention, but if he tests like a stud, he's going to be the guy who basically everybody moves up to the top of the board just because he's that big, and that, if he's also that athletic, then everybody's in trouble.
Right. And the Amani Oru, whatever it is, he's from Penn State. Chris Boyd is a Texas guy. And then Isaiah Johnson is another guy you brought up earlier.
He's from Houston.
Houston. Okay. Yeah, so people can look those up.
He's more of a project, but yeah, he's at least somebody to keep an eye on.
Okay. Perfect.
The Rock Ya-Sin from Temple, another long guy, at least listed 6'2", 190. So yeah, there's just a lot of these, and Isaiah Johnson's supposed to be at the Senior Bowl too. So there's just a lot of these super long corners that are going to be available in this class. So we'll see how it goes.
Right on. Okay, let's move to safety, and because we're up against it here, we gotta get going. We've been at it we are going on hour 2. So
I want to know if we're going to go into safeties, I want off the top right now, who's this year's Derwin James?
So the kid who is the absolute stud, whether people want to give him credit for or not for it, is Juan Thornhill from Virginia. Now, he's not as big in terms of height as Derwin James, but he's out of Virginia. He's a monster. Like, he's just an absolute beast. Safety that makes plays on the football. He can hit. He just does everything. And there are people who are going to tell you that the Alabama kid is better than him. But unlike the Alabama kid, as is so often with Alabama kids, Juan Thornhill actually made plays. And you could see it on tape, whereas you're basically saying that the Alabama kid who occasionally made plays is better. I'm going to take Juan Thornhill all day. He's a monster. I expect we'll see. We'll see what the weather does. But he's a kid. I expect he will be an absolute stud in Mobile.
What's the outlook here for the Browns at safety? Anyway, Kindred's back. You could probably extend Randall.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think this is a major need. But then again, like if you look around the league, and a lot of these teams are just playing more big nickel and they take extra. You can almost play, both the. I kind of wonder where they are. Where they're going to be at with the first safety you mentioned for us. What the heck's his name again?
Juan Thornhill?
No.
Kindred?
Our team. Yeah, Kindred. I wonder where they're going to be with Kindred going forward, and maybe he could be replaceable. I think it's, you just keep him till his contract runs out, but it could be something they're looking at. But I could see them, adding a safety. I just think it's one of the lowest things on our list.
Yeah, I'm just worried with the division and what the Browns did in the second half against the Ravens, and then San Diego did it against the Ravens, of basically playing all safeties at linebacker. I don't know if you can have too many athletes at that position to go win 2 games against Baltimore each year.
Let's keep in mind, part of the reason the Chargers played that many safeties is because they don't have any linebackers. But yeah, I mean, certainly it's an advantage. I'm wondering if Kindred gets some thought of as being a linebacker in nickel. That's certainly where I would put him. But certainly you could do the same thing with Peppers. But yeah, I mean, look, you want 4 or 5 guys, and I think Calhoun is one of them. He should be. They should re-sign him. He should be one of those guys, and that puts you at 4 right now. But if they find a 5th guy, if they can add something to it, absolutely. But I think it would be another combo guy that can potentially play the slot. And in that scenario, a guy like Lucas Dennis out of Boston College, who was an absolute stud last year in terms of production, could be that guy. And I like how Boston College tends to do it, is they have these guys play corners and safeties. So there's a lot of cross training, but that's a guy that was a ball hawk at BC and made more than his share of tackles and stuff like that may be sitting there later than maybe he should, just because of the timing of his great year. Might be a year deferred, but there's no bad way to do it. But the other guy that will probably be a big story, and potentially a guy who comes out with a ton of hype, and was in Daniel Jeremiah's first round, was Nasir Adderley Nasser Adderley from Delaware. He's a guy is a freak show type player, but that has a lot going for him. But this position on the Browns, you can make the argument, is literally the least needed position, which is not a bad place to be. But yeah, Randall, I'm curious if they want to get that extension done now, or if they want to wait. I don't think there's really a wrong way to do it. I think they're going to do it now, or at least I'm going to guess by the one tweet I saw from Demarius Randall that they're at least talking about it. But yeah, unless it's a guy who can also play at corner, I doubt you're going to see much change, unless Steve Wilkes and company are basically so just opposed to the style that they play that they get rid of him. But for whatever reason, one of the coaches they kept with changing over Freddie Kitchens was Dwayne Walker, who was the DB's coach. So that may or may not help anybody's case, but at least they have a good feel. They should have a good feel for what they have.
Oh yeah, good point.
Right on. Okay, well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Give everybody some homework to do. go through some of these players and see what they, what they like. Then we'll come back. We'll probably do a 2-hour show on kickers next because I think we need to get one of those, and then we'll wrap up the offense. Anything you guys want to add to this today? Final words. All right, Pete. Thank you again, as always. Big help. Always interested to see who's on your board. I know you go through production. Right now, is that what you're doing, Pete? You go through, like, how do you get all this production stuff wrapped up as soon as the season's over? Is that the first thing you do?
Sure, let's go with that. No, I mean, what really happens is, like, I end up going through players, and either I'll get James Coburn or somebody. I'll see lists they do, or players I have sort of casually watched, or when I do mock drafts, they sort of force me to investigate a bunch of guys. Mm-hmm. I'll find guys I like in terms of production, then go and watch their film and see if it's a fit in terms of what I think the Browns are going to want to do, or what I think they're going to be able to do athletically, or fits, or whatever like that. But
right, okay. So you have an idea, and then you're just waiting for the testing numbers, and then that's going to tell you. So. Because I know people sometimes will go, oh, well, Hiram will tell you, hey, you like this guy. And you're like, yeah, I did. And then he tested, and then I didn't like him anymore.
Right. So there's an element of that. I mean, realistically, the whole thing really gets done when I have athletic data. And it basically becomes, hey, this guy's really productive. How did he test? Or this guy's really athletic. How did he produce? And then you find those guys. You basically combine those two piles, and then it's just a matter of going through tape of those guys and just finding the guys you like, ranking them, and finding who you think are the best football players. Because so many people seem to have this idea that, like, somehow I just let the numbers do the talking and don't actually do anything, but somehow they have to get ranked, and it's not just by numbers. So you want to get through you want to get the thresholds. You want to get guys who are in that range, and then it's watching the film and finding out what guys can do, and finding what guys you like and ranking them, and those type of things. But yeah, that's the process in a nutshell.
Right on.
Trying to avoid outliers where you can get them to at least wrap around the data that works and has shown to work.
It's just so much of it, and I know this drives people nuts because everybody's like, well, we need to take a risk on so and so. The whole thing is reducing the likelihood of failure. Bet on things that don't work. It's an increased likelihood that it's not going to. So I'm willing to lose out on some of these guys in hopes that I hit on that I'm going to take the safer bet, and then people will point at me and go, "Well, Corey Coleman sucked, so this whole thing doesn't work." Okay, I guess that's enough to just shut it down. But that's how you get guys like Larry Ogunjobi. That's how you get guys like Joe Schobert. That's how you get guys like Jannard Avery. These are all guys who crushed it in terms of that prospect profile. And, then you watch the tape and you're saying, wow, this guy's, good. And these are all the things they can do. And then that's how you get there. But yeah, it's so much of it's trying to, and it doesn't, it's not always fun because you end up ruling out guys you like and who's a good player, but just not as good as you'd like him to be, like a Minkah Fitzpatrick who, I love on the field, and I think he's been great for Miami. But the numbers are what they are. And I can't, I could try to make the outlier argument, but then you end up going with the sure Pro Bowl bet. In this case, Denzel Ward and Bradley Chubb, and the Browns took Ward. All these people are saying it was a risky pick. It really wasn't. But you're going for the stud that fits it. So I'll end up having something wonky, which is like DJ Moore was my, I think 6th overall player, or Harold Landry was 5. They cleared everything and the tape's awesome. And that's what I'm going to go on and rank it accordingly. And Harold Landry was phenomenal this year, and DJ Moore, I pray they give him a quarterback someday. But I occasionally can't help but think to myself, what the hell would this guy be doing with Baker Mayfield?
No shit.
But these guys who look like they're going to take over the league. So we'll see. And guys like Mike Gesicki and I hope guys like him are great. But that's where that whole thing comes from.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for chiming in with us again. I'm sure we'll have you back about 15 times before live draft show, which should be awesome this year. Can't wait. Where can people read your mock drafts and keep up with the Browns in general?
Safest bet is just find me on Twitter at _PeteSmith_, but my stuff's at NFL Spin Zone, focused on the Browns and all that good stuff.
Thanks, brother. Always appreciate you coming on.
You got it.
Anything else, Greg?
That is all.
Twitter.
You can hit us up on there at STS Podcast, and our email is
survivingtheseason@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody, for listening, subscribing, sharing the show with your friends. We appreciate it very much. #Road to Redemption, Greg. Tell them what we say.
keep on surviving.